second rig I want to talk about is essentially a progression from the hinge stiff rig. I mean, what you've got is the hook section of the hinge stiff rig running up and down the lead core. So to construct this rig, what you'll need, I mean, it's pretty much the same. I'm using a 3-ounce atomic distance lead. That's attached to the lead core via a 3-turn Gwinner knot. Above that, you've got probably about 2.5 inches of 2mm silicone tubing. Now, you have to use the silicone tubing because when the lead hits the bottom, you want to have that flexibility. You don't want any stiff tubing attached to the loop there, pushed over the loop, purely because it will jam in and it will kick the lead core up, so that needs to be nice and flexible. Above that, I've got an atomic tapered bead, and then to create the actual hook section, what you'll need is a nice small atomic flexi ring swivel. As I said, that's running freely up and down the lead core. Now, to create the stop safely, what you'll need is a 6mm atomic buffer bead. Okay, this is nice and safe. It will stop the hook section flying right up the lead core. But again, as I said before, it's nice and safe. In case of a breakage or a crack off or anything like that, that will pull up and over your needle knot. So it's pretty much the same as the hinge stiff link, as I said before. What you've got is probably a 2.5 inch section of very stiff bristle filament that's been curved. Now, I've seen a lot of people put like great big curves in, like a withy pull rig or something like that. But I mean, I've always found success just putting like the slightest curve in it. I mean, the idea of the rig is that you're creating what could only be described as a very, very long hook shank. So what happens is that if you're fishing over any chod, the whole lot comes up to the stop, rests down on the bottom, and then your rig is sat there waiting for any unsuspecting carp. Now, same as before, I've attached the bristle filament with a 2-turn blood knot here, the tag end I've blobbed, and I've attached it to the size 6 Chodda with a 7-turn snood knot. If you can't master the snood knot, just use a no-knot rig. I mean, I know old Jim Shelley uses a no-knot rig and he catches a fair few, so I mean, that's just as effective. I've just found that the snood knot is extreme, it's just neat. Everything's inside the knot, as opposed to having like the wrap around the knot. You've got the D there for the anti-eject properties. Now, something that's very, very important with the Chodda rig is that you've always got to make sure that your hook section has got no twist whatsoever in it. Okay, it can't twist. So my advice would be to, after tying, always straighten out the hook section as best as you can, and then create the nice curve with your fingers. I mean, sometimes you might find that there's like a little bit of twist. All you have to do is just re-straighten it. It will always reset straight, and then put the curve in it, the perfect curve. So you don't want any really acute angles on it. You just want essentially a nice extension of the hook shank going to your flexi ring swivel. One thing that's very important with the Chodda rigs is that you've got to use a lead, the smallest lead that you can get away with. I mean, if you're only like close in, just use like a 1.5 ounce lead, like a 1.5 ounce atomic distance lead. I'm having to use 3-ounce leads because I'm having to cast out probably 80 to 90 yards out in the pond over there. So that's why I'm using a 3-ounce lead. But I'll always use the smallest lead that I can get away with. So that's something that's very important. The other thing that's very important is to always stretch your lead core after you've tied the whole rig. This will ensure that this section between the bottom bead and the top bead is nice and straight, and this will allow your hook section to ride up effortlessly. So that's what you want. Before you cast out, always drop the lead in the water and make sure that your hook section rises, your pop-up rises effortlessly as well. You don't want anything catching, and that's what you're after. That's the effect that you're after. A nice, smooth rise up through your water. So then you know, whenever you cast out, pull back to reset it. So essentially, as it enters the water, it'll be up here. You pull back, it'll reset it to the bottom bead, and then you let it down again, which will bring it up to the top, and then you're fishing. Sometimes you can set your 6mm buffer bead quite low if the quite short section here between this bead and this bead quite short if the chod isn't too heavy. Alternatively, if it's like very thick chod or weed, you can set it right back up here, so your lead will drop into the weed, and then your hook link section will ride up and be fishing perfectly above the weed. So that's the effect that you're after. You've got to have a very buoyant pop-up, which these are. I mean, the key and the crux is that as the lead drops down through the water, the whole lot rides up, hits a stop, and then rests on any chod. The good thing about the Chodda Rig is it gives you supreme confidence when you're fishing. I mean, I didn't really have any faith in it, like, to begin with. I was fishing it, but I wasn't really fishing it properly. A friend of mine showed me exactly how to do it, and I caught a couple of fish on it, and now it's the rig that I use on 2 rods all the time. The thing is, if you get that drop, you're either going to get a really hard drop, like when you're hitting down onto gravel, or a semi-donk, I like to call them, where it's like a kind of semi-hard, like bottom, or you get like a barely detectable drop where you're fishing on silt. If you get a drop, then you're fishing, and that gives you confidence. The same can't be said for a lot of rigs, you know, so I mean that's why the Chodda Rig's so effective, because you're always fishing.